The Second World War ended officially in 1945, but the war's silence is not complete, nor is its record whole. Beneath the rubble of fallen cities, behind doors sealed in archives, and inside memoranda stamped Geheime Reichssache and Top Secret, lie histories written in shadows rather than sunlight. These were not victories paraded through streets, nor defeats discussed in textbooks. They were the truths too corrosive to the New World Order, concealed from public knowledge and buried beneath layers of secrecy. In the corridors of the Reich Security Main Office, in Soviet basements filled with confiscated dossiers, in forgotten villages consumed by war's scorched earth, fragments remain. Files marked with numbers rather than names, maps annotated in disappearing ink, testimonies suppressed in tribunal halls because they threatened fragile alliances. What lingers are hints, glimpses, disjointed sentences torn from interrogations and coded telegrams that slipped past censors. A bunker door welded shut, its contents removed before Allied patrols arrived. A convoy that vanished into snow, leaving behind nothing but whispers of poisoned air. A clandestine negotiation in neutral territory, where hands were shaken above tables lined with looted Reichsmarks and smuggled tungsten. A camp with no surviving prisoners, whose existence was so thoroughly erased that only ash drifting from the pines betrayed what had taken place. These are not legends. They are buried fragments of truth, documented in cold military language, redacted in ink, and scattered like bones beneath the soil of Europe. Tonight, those fragments resurface, not as history written by victors, but as unspeakable secrets long denied. Chapter 1. The Forgotten Bunkers Beneath Berlin. The fall of Berlin in April 1945 marked the crumbling finale of the Third Reich, but among the ruins of the city lay secrets never catalogued by victors nor acknowledged in tribunal halls. Beneath streets reduced to ash and twisted iron, the Reichssicherheitshauptamt had overseen the construction of subterranean chambers not listed on standard Wehrmacht blueprints. The existence of these structures emerged only through fragments, scattered Soviet reports, captured German engineering notes, and testimonies extracted under duress from SS officers who preferred execution over cooperation. These chambers, built with reinforced concrete and outfitted with armored steel doors, were sealed as the Red Army closed its grip on Berlin. Yet their contents remained unrecorded, their function unacknowledged, leaving behind the shadow of a secret. Infrastructure buried beneath the capital of the Reich, Soviet. Engineer battalion records from the 79th Rifle Corps described torch-cut doors that had been welded from the inside, their hinges reinforced with riveted steel plates. Behind them, thick air ducts hinted at chambers beyond, but blasting charges collapsed much of the passage before exploration was possible. Recovered fragments of Reich construction invoices, marked with the insignia of Organization Tot, referenced deliveries of uranium oxide, tungsten carbide, and sealed crates designated Gerät M, equipment never identified in surviving documentation. Soviet archival file number 4263, declassified in the late 1980s, mentions the recovery of radioactive materials of unknown origin from one such site. Curiously, the notation ends abruptly, redacted with black bars and a stamp reading, "Classified, strategic use." Whatever was removed from those chambers was spirited away into the opaque machinery of Cold War secrecy. Eyewitnesses, present during Berlin's capture, recalled the ferocity with which NKVD detachments secured specific neighborhoods, expelling even Red Army infantry in order to conduct sealed operations. One Soviet officer, whose memoirs were later suppressed in Moscow, described truck convoys departing Friedrichshain during the night of May 5, 1945. The vehicles were escorted by armed guards, their cargo covered by canvas tarps stamped with chemical hazard insignia. No inventory was ever filed. By dawn, the convoy had vanished into the east, its trail disappearing into Soviet-controlled territory. When interrogated years later, German engineers attached to Organization Tot recalled being ordered in 1944 to construct reinforced storage vaults capable of withstanding direct bomb impact. These vaults, unlike typical air raid shelters, were designed with complex air filtration systems and triple-sealed steel doors, features unnecessary for civilian protection but essential for storing volatile or experimental material. Western intelligence began piecing together fragments in the early 1950s. A CIA report, declassified decades later, referenced intercepted Soviet communique describing uranium cylinders of Reich origin, and aerodynamic components secured from Berlin underground vaults. The language was vague, but the timing coincided with the Soviet Union's sudden acceleration in nuclear research. American analysts quietly suggested that German material hidden beneath Berlin may have influenced early Soviet progress, though no admission was ever made in official channels. British intelligence, through its own channels, also reported unusual Soviet activity in Berlin, noting the use of specialized equipment for radiation handling. Yet when requests were made for joint Allied access to captured sites, the Soviet command denied the existence of any such facilities. Residents of post-war Berlin, attempting to rebuild amid ruins, occasionally stumbled across sealed hatches or collapsed tunnels. One notable discovery occurred in 1956, when construction workers laying foundation for new housing near Alexanderplatz unearthed a reinforced hatch bearing the Reichsadler emblem. Inside, a passage led into a chamber partially collapsed by explosives. The walls bore scorch marks, and twisted remnants of steel crates were scattered across the floor. Soviet authorities quickly seized the site, expelled workers, and imposed silence. Witnesses recalled the smell of chemical residue that lingered for days, burning the throat and stinging the eyes. No report was filed, and the hatch was resealed beneath concrete. Theories flourished within intelligence circles, whispered in corridors of Langley and Whitehall, yet never acknowledged in public. Some speculated that the vaults stored prototypes of advanced V-weapons, components for jet propulsion systems, or guidance mechanisms that had not reached operational deployment. Others suggested chemical or biological agents, remnants of Reich research programs desperate to reverse Germany's collapsing war fortunes. The most unsettling theory, referenced in an MI6 memorandum labeled File 17Z, suggested the presence of nuclear-related material. German scientists such as Heisenberg had been engaged in uranium research, though their program was fragmented. Yet if sealed canisters of uranium oxide were indeed hidden in Berlin's vaults, their capture by Soviet forces would explain the speed with which Moscow achieved nuclear capability by 1949. The air inside these bunkers was thick with a silence that no document could fully describe. Imagine narrow corridors lit by failing generators, walls sweating with condensation, and crates stacked like coffins in the dark. Some accounts describe stenciled markings, Nur für SS Gebrauch and Gefahrstoff. The crates themselves, according to one recovered manifest, were categorized under Project Comet, a codename not appearing in any known Reich records. If accurate, this points to a program erased not only by Allied victory, but by deliberate post-war suppression. The absence of documentation is not accidental, it is systemic, the product of governments that found certain truths too destabilizing for public record. The bunkers were not isolated. Maps captured by Soviet forces hinted at a network running beneath critical districts of Berlin, linking ministries, communication centers, and armaments factories. One such diagram, later smuggled into Western hands, showed tunnels extending beneath the Reich Chancellery itself, leading to vaults labeled with numbers rather than names. These vaults remain unaccounted for in post-war reconstruction records, their precise locations lost beneath layers of modern construction. To this day, engineers working on Berlin's subway occasionally report anomalies, reinforced walls encountered where none should exist, voids that extend deeper than official maps suggest. Yet excavation halts before answers are found, halted either by city authorities or by the quiet intervention of external agencies. By the 1960s, both NATO and Warsaw Pact intelligence had filed the matter into sealed archives, preferring silence over exposure. For the Soviets, the captured material was too valuable to admit. For the West, the possibility of complicity in concealing German research threatened to fracture fragile Cold War diplomacy. In 1972, a Stasi memorandum surfaced briefly before disappearing again. It referenced material Gruppe B-17, stored in restricted facilities near Sverdlovsk, originally marked with German insignias from Berlin vaults. The memo was stamped for official use only and vanished into the classified corridors of East German intelligence. No explanation was ever offered. The story of Berlin's forgotten bunkers is not one of victory or loss. It is the story of silence, welded shut with steel doors and buried beneath concrete. The rubble of the city was cleared, streets rebuilt, and monuments erected. Yet beneath it all, chambers remain, their contents stripped away and hidden within archives that may never open. The world was told that Berlin's fall marked the Reich's final breath. But in truth, something else survived, sealed in darkness. transported under guard, and locked within the arsenals of superpowers. The war ended, but its buried secrets lived on, shaping the shadow conflict that followed. What remains today are fragments, archival notations, suppressed testimonies, sealed hatches rediscovered only to be reburied. The truth lies beneath the city, beneath the stone and steel of reconstruction. It is a silence heavy with questions. What exactly did the Soviets remove in those convoys? How many vaults remain untouched beneath Berlin's streets? And why, decades later, does the subject remain absent from official histories? These questions linger, unanswered, entombed beneath Berlin, just as securely as the steel doors once locked in the Reich's final days. Chapter 2: Operation Iron Wolf Disappearing Convoy. In the frozen final months of 1944, when the Eastern Front collapsed under the relentless pressure of the Red Army, the Reich initiated a desperate evacuation program known to only a select few within the Wehrmacht and SS command structure. Among these operations, one bore the codename Eisenwolf, Iron Wolf. It was not a standard troop withdrawal, nor a logistical maneuver to preserve dwindling supplies. Instead, Iron Wolf was a convoy of secrecy, carrying cargo whose value outweighed battalions of men. The surviving records are fragmented, deliberately obscured in both German and Soviet archives, but a mosaic emerges through declassified fragments of intercepted Enigma traffic, interrogation transcripts, and reconnaissance logs. Together, they reveal a ghost convoy that departed Königsberg in December 1944 under the cover of night, vanishing without a trace into the snowbound forests of East Prussia. According to surviving Luftwaffe dispatches, the convoy consisted of 12 armored trucks, 2 fuel carriers, and an escort detachment of the 5th Panzer Division. The vehicles were marked only with the insignia of the Wehrmacht supply service, yet their cargo was sealed in reinforced containers, stenciled with the Reichsadler and chemical hazard symbols. The trucks moved under blackout conditions, their progress shielded by an elaborate deception plan involving false radio signals and diversionary troop movements. Enigma intercepts captured by Allied cryptographers in Bletchley Park reference Das Blutgut, translated literally as the blood cargo. The meaning of this term remains contested, though interrogations of captured officers years later hinted at chemical agents developed at facilities in Diehenfurth and Gendorf. These compounds, precursors to tabun and sarin, represented the Reich's last attempt at wielding terror as science. The decision to move such material westward, away from the approaching Soviets, reveals both desperation and a deliberate attempt to conceal knowledge from enemy hands. Eyewitness accounts from civilians living near Königsberg describe the convoy passing through villages under tight guard. Soldiers ordered residents indoors, shutters closed, under penalty of execution. One villager later testified in Soviet captivity that livestock fell sick days after the convoy passed, as if traces of chemical residue had leaked into the snow. The testimony was never entered into official trial records, instead sequestered into Soviet intelligence file number 7 to 1947. The file describes subsequent illness in the area, skin rashes, difficulty breathing, livestock deaths, but concludes with a stamped directive, sealed, no further investigation. This deliberate suppression suggests that Soviet authorities understood the gravity of what had moved through East Prussia and chose secrecy over disclosure. The disappearance of the convoy remains the central enigma. Aerial reconnaissance from Allied bombers recorded vehicle tracks diverging near the frozen Curonian lagoon, leading into dense pine forests. Yet no corresponding exit tracks were ever identified. The vehicles simply vanished, as though swallowed by the landscape itself. Soviet search patrols, advancing through the region in early 1945, reported strange findings: patches of scorched snow, abandoned field equipment, and shallow craters suggesting controlled demolitions. Local accounts describe muffled explosions echoing across the forest during the night, followed by a chemical stench that lingered for days. Villagers later recalled soldiers erecting perimeter fences and forbidding entry. Bulldozers sealed sections of woodland, piling earth over sites where no official battle had occurred. These measures, described in GRU engineering logs, hint at a deliberate burial operation, concealing not just wreckage, but the very existence of the convoy's cargo. Western intelligence began its own hunt for Iron Wolf in the years following the war. The US Office of Strategic Services, later absorbed into the CIA, received fragmented reports from German POWs claiming that the convoy's cargo contained gas drums intended for Berlin defense. Others suggested looted art and treasure, bound for secret caches in the Reich's collapsing heartland. Yet the consistency across multiple testimonies about chemical insignias on the containers points to something far more sinister. In 1948, a classified US Army Chemical Corps assessment concluded that the Reich had likely attempted to relocate its most advanced nerve agents away from the Eastern Front. The report hypothesized that these agents may have been destroyed, deliberately to prevent capture, or else hidden in sealed underground depots still undiscovered. Yet no physical evidence was ever retrieved, leaving only speculation and silence. Declassified Soviet documents from the 1960s provide additional clues. An internal memorandum from the KGB references a contaminated exclusion zone near the Lithuanian border, where radiation and chemical tests were conducted throughout the 1950s. The area corresponded geographically to the last known path of the Iron Wolf convoy. The memo noted abnormal soil samples, unexplained wildlife deaths, and lingering toxic presence despite the passage of years. Curiously, the document referred to the contamination as originating from foreign military stockpiles captured in 1945. Language avoids explicit identification, but aligns disturbingly well with the missing convoy. Western analysts reviewing the memo in the 1990s concluded that the Soviets had indeed discovered the remnants of Iron Wolf, but buried the truth under secrecy, fearing international condemnation if evidence of nerve agent possession became public. The choice of codename Eisenwolf is itself revealing. German records often selected symbolic codenames tied to mythology or national identity. The wolf, a recurring emblem of predatory strength, resonates with the image of a hidden predator striking from darkness. Within SS symbolism, the wolf was also associated with secrecy and ruthlessness. That such a codename was chosen for a chemical weapons transport suggests deliberate intimidation, a psychological message embedded in operational secrecy. To the men guarding the convoy, it was not merely a logistical task, but a mission cloaked in menace, designed to protect material that could alter the course of the war if unleashed. Yet Iron Wolf was never unleashed. No chemical strikes on Allied or Soviet troops materialized from this convoy. Instead, it disappeared, swallowed by snow and secrecy. Theories abound. Some historians argue that the convoy was destroyed by German forces themselves, its cargo too dangerous to allow Soviet capture. Others believe the Soviets intercepted and quietly appropriated the material, accelerating their own chemical weapons programs. A darker possibility lingers, that remnants of the convoy remain buried in sealed forest bunkers, their lethal contents waiting silently beneath decades of earth, their presence known only to classified military engineers tasked with guarding poisoned ground. In the decades since, the forests of East Prussia have been resettled, their scars concealed by time. But rumors persist among locals. Hunters whisper of strange patches where vegetation will not grow. Farmers recall digging into the soil only to find rusted steel drums, marked with faded Reich insignia, quickly confiscated by silent officials. The spectre of Iron Wolf endures, less a ghost story than a shadow war relic whose toxic breath lingers beneath the surface. For intelligence agencies, the unanswered question remains critical. Was Iron Wolf destroyed, or did its contents survive, transferred into the hidden arsenals of the Cold War? The truth lies buried with the convoy itself, a silence as cold and enduring as the snow into which it vanished. Chapter 3. The Silent Pact of Zurich Shadows. In the fog of war, alliances are rarely pure, and neutrality is often a mask. In the year 1943, as the Second World War entered its bloodiest phase, a series of clandestine meetings occurred in Zurich, Switzerland. Meetings absent from diplomatic cables, erased from tribunal records, and only traceable through the scattered remnants of burned files and decrypted fragments. The codename given to these dealings was Project Nachtschatten, Nightshade. It was an apt name, for what transpired in Zurich was a poisonous alliance, a silent pact formed in shadows, where the lines between enemy and ally blurred in the pursuit of profit and survival. Though Switzerland's neutrality was loudly proclaimed to the world, behind shuttered windows in banking halls and safe houses, men who should never have shared a table exchanged promises, written in invisible ink. The story emerges from Gestapo memorandum file number 82243, a charred fragment recovered from the ruins of Berlin after the Reich's fall. The surviving pages reference Sondertreffen Zurich and list attendees by code initials rather than full names. Cross-referenced with OSS intercepts, these initials correspond to Reich economic advisors, representatives of German industrial conglomerates such as IG Farben and Krupp, and intermediaries tied to Western banking syndicates. The subject of their discussions was not troop movements or military alliances, but the flow of resources, the tungsten critical for armor-piercing shells, the laundering of gold confiscated from occupied territories, and the assurance of post-war financial protection for corporations deeply entangled in the Nazi war machine. In effect, these meetings were insurance policies, forged in blood and coin, to ensure that when the Reich inevitably collapsed, its collaborators would emerge intact and ready to rebuild. MI6 decrypts provide further insight. Declassified only in the 1970s, intercepted messages referred cryptically to the Zurich shadows, describing economic envoys moving freely under Swiss neutrality. Surveillance reports noted the transfer of briefcases heavy with Reichsmarks, bearer bonds, and promissory notes stamped with the insignia of major European banks. These transactions were deliberately obscured behind layers of shell companies and numbered accounts. When questioned after the war, Swiss banking officials maintained silence, citing confidentiality, but testimonies extracted in closed-door interrogations of captured German financiers told a different story. One banker, under duress, admitted that Zurich vaults received shipments of looted gold, some bearing the melted insignias of confiscated Jewish property. These deposits, he claimed, were exchanged for guarantees that would allow post-war re-entry into global markets. His confession was sealed, never entered into the Nuremberg trial records. The moral weight of these revelations is staggering. While Allied soldiers bled across the fields of Normandy and Stalingrad in Swiss boardrooms, men in tailored suits ensured that the machinery of war could outlive defeat. They calculated not in lives, but in profit margins, ensuring that when the smoke cleared, certain corporations would not only survive but thrive. American intelligence, aware of these dealings, chose suppression over exposure. OSS reports from 1944 clearly outline knowledge of Zurich meetings, yet internal memoranda advised silence. The reason was pragmatic. After the war, these same corporations would be essential to European reconstruction and to the economic stability of a continent fractured by ruin. To expose their complicity would destabilize the fragile balance needed to confront the looming Soviet threat. Thus, truth was sacrificed on the altar of geopolitics. The Zurich Pact, as it came to be whispered in intelligence corridors, was not formalized in treaties or signatures. It lived in the shadows, sealed by handshakes and unrecorded exchanges. Its secrecy was its strength. Swiss neutrality provided the perfect camouflage, shielding participants from scrutiny under the guise of diplomatic discretion. Those who traveled to Zurich moved under forged passports, escorted by intermediaries skilled in evading both Gestapo surveillance and Allied counterintelligence. The meetings took place in rented apartments, secluded chalets, and the upper floors of discreet banking houses. Curtains were drawn, lights dimmed, and voices kept to whispers as ledgers were passed and agreements made. In the archives of silence, these moments remain more damning than battles. They prove that beneath the war of ideology, a war of capital raged uninterrupted. What makes the Zurich shadows most disturbing is not only the collusion, but the erasure. After the war, fragments of evidence surfaced briefly before vanishing. Witnesses who attempted to speak were discredited, silenced, or simply ignored. When investigative journalists in the 1960s sought access to wartime Swiss banking records, they were met with iron walls of confidentiality laws. Documents that did slip through, such as coded telegrams between Zurich and Berlin, were dismissed as routine financial correspondence, stripped of context. The selective blindness was deliberate. Both East and West had little interest in exposing a history that implicated their own industries and threatened economic alliances essential to the Cold War. The Zurich shadows were buried under the rubble not of bombs, but of denial, yet the silence was never complete. In the 1990s, with the release of certain declassified intelligence files, whispers grew louder. CIA archival notes referred explicitly to Zurich 1943 meetings and described them as of critical importance to post-war asset redistribution. One note, heavily redacted, referenced the transfer of scientific expertise and material support guarantees through intermediaries. This suggests that Zurich was not only about finance, but about preserving German technological knowledge. Knowledge later siphoned into both American and Soviet programs during Operation Paperclip and its Soviet counterparts. The pact was not simply financial insurance. It was a bridge ensuring that the Reich's intellectual and industrial elite would be integrated into the very powers that had vowed their destruction. The ethical stain of the Zurich Pact lingers. It represents a betrayal of those who fought believing the war was a struggle of good against evil. For in Zurich, while bombs fell on Hamburg and civilians starved in Warsaw, men in quiet rooms plotted continuity, not collapse. They guaranteed survival for the guilty, ensuring that the machinery of war would be reborn in the guise of post-war progress. The silence surrounding these meetings is not accidental. It is engineered, protected by those who profited from secrecy. And while governments proclaimed victory and justice at Nuremberg, the real victories were counted in Swiss bank ledgers, invisible to the public eye. The Zurich Pact is more than a footnote. It is a wound deliberately left unhealed. It reveals a truth that nations still refuse to admit, that wars may end on battlefields, but in boardrooms and banking houses, they continue without interruption. The Zurich shadows were not a conspiracy theory. They were a reality written in burned files, sealed testimonies, and the quiet transfer of looted gold across borders. They stand as proof that neutrality can serve as cover for collaboration, and that history, as recorded, is often only what the powerful permit us to see. The silence of Zurich was deliberate, and its echoes still haunt the archives today. Chapter 4. The Vanished Prisoners of Camp Nordstern. In the vast forests of occupied Poland, where shadows of pines stretched across frozen soil, stood a site absent from official Nazi registries. It was known only by a code name whispered in intercepted OSS communique and in scattered Soviet reports. Camp Nordstern. Unlike Auschwitz, Treblinka, or Sobibor, Nordstern left behind no survivors to testify, no photographs liberated by advancing Allied forces, and no entry in the exhaustive files of the Nuremberg tribunals. What remains are fragments, partial SS transport ledgers, scattered intelligence decrypts, and Polish witness testimonies sequestered in archives for decades. Together, they reveal the existence of a facility deliberately erased from post-war record, a place where selected prisoners, marked as Nacht und Nebel, night and fog, were made to disappear without a trace. The earliest reference to Nordstern appears in a 1943 Wehrmacht rail manifest recovered from the ruins of Breslau, listing a transport of 327 detainees described as special detainees, red triangle classification. The document, stamped with the emblem of the Reich Main Security Office, bears the notation NN Transfer Nordstern. Cross-referencing with captured Gestapo files indicates that many of these detainees were resistance leaders from France, Norway, and occupied Poland, along with scientists and intellectuals targeted by the Ahnenerbe for their knowledge. Unlike the industrial extermination centers of the Reich, Nordstern was designed with precision selection. Those sent there were not ordinary prisoners. They were individuals whose skills, political influence, or scientific expertise carried value for secret programs operating beyond the site of the public war. Declassified Soviet archives shed further light. In March 1945, as the Red Army advanced into Lower Silesia, NKVD reconnaissance units reported discovering an abandoned camp, partially demolished by explosives. Their field notes describe wooden barracks collapsed into ash, tunnels dynamited, and furnaces still warm with residue. One officer reported that the air was thick with acrid smoke, carrying the unmistakable scent of burning flesh. Yet no corpses were recovered, only scattered bone fragments and heaps of ash buried in snow. The report, filed under Soviet Archive number 42116, notes evidence of human experimentation linked to high altitude, survival and chemical endurance. This aligns disturbingly with testimonies from captured SS doctors who admitted under interrogation that certain facilities, unlisted in official records, had been tasked with experiments to test human limits under extreme conditions. The Ahnenerbe connection is undeniable. Founded as a pseudo-scientific arm of the SS, the Ahnenerbe had been granted extraordinary latitude to conduct research under the guise of protecting Aryan heritage. By 1942, however, it had expanded into brutal experimentation, using prisoners as unwilling subjects in programs ranging from freezing resistance to chemical exposure trials. Nordstern, based on intelligence fragments, appears to have been one such facility. What distinguished it was its secrecy. Where other camps left behind a horrific trail of survivors, Nordstern left nothing. Its captives were classified under the Nacht und Nebel Directive, which mandated that individuals vanish without record, stripped from all registries and erased from public knowledge. Families received no notification, tribunals found no documentation, and the world was left to assume the victims had simply disappeared into the fog of war. Polish underground intelligence, operating in the region during 1944, submitted clandestine reports describing unusual activity near dense forest clearings. Locals observed convoys of covered trucks arriving at night, their cargo escorted by SS guards, wearing black armbands marked with the Ahnenerbe rune. The vehicles were seen entering fortified compounds ringed by barbed wire, their interiors illuminated faintly by searchlights. Weeks later, columns of smoke rose above the trees, carrying a bitter stench that clung to the wind. Villagers reported hearing muffled cries and the echo of gunfire during these nights. But when Soviet or Polish partisans attempted reconnaissance, they found the perimeter too heavily defended. By January 1945, the compound was destroyed in a controlled demolition, leaving only cratered ground and charred remains. Witnesses described the final days as a frenzy of activity, with SS officers ordering mass executions before retreating westward. The absence of Nordstern in post-war prosecutions raises troubling questions. At Nuremberg, exhaustive evidence of the Reich's atrocities was laid bare, yet no mention of Nordstern was ever presented. Historians examining tribunal transcripts note that references to NN transfers abruptly end in 1943, as if deliberately removed. One theory suggests that both Soviet and Western intelligence chose to suppress Nordstern's existence because of the nature of its experiments. If documentation revealed the extent of human trials in aviation medicine and chemical resistance, then the material might have been quietly absorbed into post-war research programs on both sides of the emerging Cold War. Indeed, declassified CIA documents from the 1950s make vague references to acquired access data on high-altitude survival trials, origin redacted. These chilling fragments imply that the suffering of Nordstern's prisoners was not only hidden, but recycled, their deaths fueling scientific advancements never acknowledged publicly. Survivor testimony is absent, yet echoes of Nordstern persist in the accounts of surrounding villagers. One woman recalled seeing SS guards loading bodies into transport vehicles during the winter of 1944, their faces covered with cloth masks. Another described ash drifting from tall chimneys, settling on snow like grey dust. Farmers in the region avoided fields near the site for decades, claiming the soil carried an unnatural bitterness. In the 1990s, Polish investigators conducting soil analysis at suspected Nordstern locations reported abnormal traces of chemical agents, consistent with remnants of nerve gas research. Their findings were quickly classified by national defense authorities, citing potential hazards and international sensitivities. The vanishing of Nordstern's prisoners remains one of the darkest enigmas of the war. They were not ordinary detainees swept into the machinery of extermination, but targeted individuals. Resistance leaders silenced, intellectuals erased, scientists consumed in research they never consented to. Their absence from history is deliberate, engineered by a regime that sought not only to destroy but to erase. The silence that followed was maintained by powers who, after the war, valued the knowledge extracted from Nordstern more than they valued justice for its victims. It is a silence heavier than rubble, one sealed by both fire and bureaucracy. Today, the forests of Poland have reclaimed much of the ground where Nordstern once stood. Pines grow where barracks burned, and the earth is quiet save for the wind. Yet beneath the soil lies ash that whispers of vanished lives. Lives consumed in experiments never admitted, names erased from records, destinies lost to the night and fog. Nordstern is not remembered because memory was forbidden. It exists only in fragments, in files half burned, in testimonies suppressed, in anomalies noted by intelligence officers who were told to look away. The camp did not disappear. It was made to vanish, deliberately cut from history. But like all shadows, its outline remains, cast by the absence it left behind. The vanished prisoners of Camp Nordstern remain uncounted, unnamed. But their silence is an indictment more damning than any tribunal verdict could pronounce. The war ended, but the silence did not. In Berlin, welded steel doors still seal chambers beneath reconstructed streets. In East Prussia, the convoy of Iron Wolf lingers as poisoned ground, where forests grow unnaturally still. In Zurich, the shadows of bankers and industrialists continue to stain ledgers that have never been opened. And in the forests of Poland, Nordstern's vanished prisoners remain nameless, their traces buried in ash and soil. Each of these secrets shares a common thread: deliberate erasure. Governments erased evidence to protect fragile alliances, to preserve intelligence gains, to shield corporations, or to recycle the results of human suffering into the machinery of the Cold War. Truth became a casualty, not of oversight, but of choice. The archives that hold these fragments are guarded with a silence as heavy as concrete. Soviet files stamped with redacted bars, Allied memoranda marked classified indefinitely, Swiss vaults locked by confidentiality laws, and testimonies sealed from tribunals, all speak to a collusion across borders and ideologies. The victors, so eager to proclaim justice, found themselves bound by the very secrets they uncovered. They buried them not in the soil of Europe, but in the basements of intelligence agencies, where files rest untouched. Their covers marked only with file numbers and the warning, not for release. Yet silence cannot hold forever. As decades pass, fragments emerge, burned papers found in attics, declassified notes stripped of context, and whispered testimonies from men too old to fear reprisal. They paint an incomplete picture, but enough to reveal the edges of a truth still hidden. The questions remain unresolved, and perhaps deliberately so. What lies sealed beneath Berlin? Where did Iron Wolf's convoy truly disappear? Who counted the prophets in Zurich's shadows? How many names were erased at Nordstern? These questions linger in the darkness between official history and forbidden memory, waiting for a day when the last file is opened and the last silence broken.